We hear from a lot of nonprofits who are proud of the work that they're doing, but don't feel like their website does it justice. And it just doesn't like capture the full scope of the ways that they're making the world a better place. And that disconnect between what's happening on the ground and how it shows up on your site is something that an impact page is uniquely positioned to bridge. But too often, these impact pages just become a list of statistics and reports that don't really tell a compelling story. And when the page falls flat, your visitors are a whole lot less likely to engage or get involved. And I completely understand why this happened. Like you're busy doing the work at your organization, and the impact page is often built sort of iteratively over the course of many years. And, additions are made as new information becomes available, but typically the rest of the page isn't updated. So over time, as a bunch of new things are added, there's just not sort of a clear, compelling narrative to the page anymore, which leads to it just being less compelling for visitors. So, uh, the other thing is maybe you're just kind of getting started as an organization and you don't have a ton of data to share yet, or maybe you're just kind of new to your data collection journey. So it's tough to know exactly how to talk about your work on an impact page when you don't have a whole long history of impact to demonstrate. But when it's done right, an impact page can be a super powerful tool for storytelling and for fundraising. And so today we're going to really just kind of rethink the role that the page plays in our websites and give you actionable steps that you can take to make yours more impact. And I think a good place to start is by identifying what your impact page actually needs to do. Impact pages are unique. And on its own, it's rarely kind of the star of the show on your website, but it plays a really important supporting role in the success of your website overall. And that's because a great impact page sort of serves as this one-stop shop to provide your visitors with a sense of the work that you do and what you've accomplished and who you serve and really why your work matters. And that's really powerful, right? A lot of pages throughout your website address these things from kind of different, maybe more specific angles, but your impact page is sort of where all of those details come together to bring your mission to life. Where you show not just kind of what you do, but what's actually changed for the better because of it, kind of the difference that you're making in the world. At the end of the day, your impact page needs to answer one key question in the minds of your visitors. Can I trust you to make a difference? This is really the central question that your impact page needs to be able to answer. Can I trust you to make a difference, right? Not just what difference are you making in the world. That's certainly part of it, but it really goes deeper than that. Can I trust your organization is going to be able to deliver on your mission, right? To make a difference in the way that you're envisioning or you're promising to your visitors through your mission and your vision and the content throughout your website. If the visitors really need that level of trust before they're ready to support you or give you their time or make a gift, then something worth remembering about this key question, it's not necessarily dependent on you having a long history of service or a long track record. Like impact pages are not just for really established, long-standing organizations. There are ways to answer this question and inspire trust and confidence with your visitors, even for newer organizations. So we're going to really dive into both how established organizations, but also newer organizations can answer this key question. Can I trust you to make a difference? Right. So how do you actually do that? We're going to walk through 5 practical steps and best practices that you can take to level up your impact page, along with a lot of examples. We have a lot of examples in here that can serve as inspiration. And our goal here is really to just sort of rethink what an impact page can be, just what makes a good, compelling, and effective impact page, and then also share, again, concrete steps that you can take for improving yours. And like we just mentioned, these steps are designed to be applicable for organizations of any size or any stage. So whether you have years of data and reports and stories on an existing page, or you're just kind of getting started with that journey to gather and collect data, this advice should come in handy. But as we always say, pick what you need and leave the rest. Like, your organization and your audience better than anyone else in the world. So make sure that you're sort of applying these through, your own gut. What do you think is going to resonate with your audience and showcase your work in the most compelling way possible? All right. So first step here is to show why your work matters. Your impact page is a chance to connect the dots for your visitors between what you do and why it actually matters in practice. And a common thing that we see on impact pages is a list of outputs, like, how many meals were served, how many people attended a training, how many volunteers pitched in. And to be perfectly clear, that is not a bad thing. Like, those numbers absolutely matter. They are real, they're very concrete, they're oftentimes easy to understand. And sometimes they're just the most kind of practical, accessible data that a nonprofit has. But on their own, they can leave visitors thinking like, okay, so what did all of that activity actually lead to? Right? Why does your work actually matter? How is it making the world a better place? And so that's really what your impact page is for, connecting the dots for your visitors between what you're doing and why it matters. Just kind of telling the fuller story of your impact by showing what's changed as a result of your. So how do you do that? First thing, share outcomes, not just outputs whenever possible. So what exactly do we mean by this? So outputs are often things like activities or deliverables, where outcomes are the actual results or the longer term effects of those outputs. So another way to kind of think about this is outputs help visitors understand what you do, and outcomes help them understand why it matters. So again, outputs are more of what you do, outcomes help them understand why it matters. And when your page clearly demonstrates why your work matters, you shift from talking about activity to talking about true impact, right? Which brings your mission to life and builds trust and ultimately inspires visitors to take action and get further involved. So here's a great example from one of our clients, Faith Community Pharmacy. They work to provide free medication for chronic illness to people who can't afford them, specifically in Northern Kentucky. And they do a really lovely job of not only highlighting things like clients served and prescription dispensed, but also the outcomes of those clients receiving proper medication and care. Right? Like, they share a 60% decrease in emergency room visits and a 74% decrease in hospitalizations. Like, those are really compelling outcomes and clearly show their work is making a meaningful difference in the community. Next up, highlight metrics that reflect your progress and align with your unique value. Now, we know that not every organization is in the same place when it comes to data, and sometimes outputs are all we really got to work with. So the key is to use them strategically, if that's the position that we're in. And we recommend highlighting metrics that show your progress while also aligning with your unique value. If you've been in other office hours, you've heard us call this differentiated value. And it's really just the way that you help that other organizations can't or don't. It's really just what makes you unique and sets you apart from all the other organizations out there working in your space. And highlighting these types of metrics helps folks understand what you do, like you specifically. What do you do as an organization? And they're much more meaningful and impactful than more generic metrics that could really be shared by any organization. So here's an example from another one of our clients, Fund Texas Choice. They provide practical support for folks seeking abortion care, less about paying for the care itself and more about the practical steps that folks have to take to access that care. And these stats do a nice job reflecting their unique approach and highlighting the scope of the work that they do, like funding transportation and lodging and childcare and food and even assistance for companions to join. And then plus they also pair it with a quote that kind of pulls it all together. And this quote also serves to handle an objection that a visitor might have, this thought that might be going through their head. Basically, it sounded too good to be true, might be something that their visitors are actively thinking. And so they actually put a quote or testimonial right here on the page that addresses that thought. Next up here, cut internal metrics that don't serve your audience. Just really kind of focus on data that your visitors will actually care about, right? It might sound obvious, but it's important to remember. Like your impact page just isn't really designed to collect and display information that you or your team personally find impressive. It's really to help your visitors better understand whether they can trust you to make that difference that we talked about. And truthfully, it's pretty rare that things like the number of, website visitors per month or email subscribers or social media followers or even like partners or sponsors you have or awards received, events hosted, those types of things generally just aren't answering that question for visitors. And where you can, try to cut these sorts of stats that are more kind of internally meaningful. And if you can, or don't have anything else to replace them with, at least put your stats into proper context. Like, unless your stats speak completely for themselves, putting them into some sort of context is going to be really important for visitors. We want them to walk away with an understanding of how you make a difference. And so giving them the context to understand what you're sharing is a really key part of that. So here's an example from a client of ours, CTS Youth Society. This organization operates a summer camp program for young people in Metro Vancouver. And this snapshot of their impact page tells us how many campers were hosted, how many hours were logged, and how many projects they undertook. And on their own, these numbers they don't mean a whole lot because they're definitely not meaningless. I don't want to imply they're meaningless, but they just don't show the full picture for a visitor that is brand new to understanding the work that CTS Youth Society is doing. But what they've done, which I think is really cool, is they pair it with a sentence or two that helps really bring each stat to life. So for instance, this first one, 556 campers, becomes more than 500 young campers connected with nature, the environment, and each other at no cost. Like that's amazing. And I wouldn't necessarily get all of that just by seeing 556 campers. And bonus points to them, they're also following a lot of the other action items too. So these stats align really nicely with their unique value and are just going to matter a whole lot to folks who care about their cause. Next, your page can also be used to highlight the need you're addressing or anticipated outcomes. This one right here is especially helpful for newer organizations who may not have a long history or results just yet, or again, for folks who are maybe earlier in their journey to collect data. Whether you have results or not, this can be your chance to really demonstrate that you understand the issues at hand and that you built your programs or services with this understanding in mind. And that can actually go a really long way in answering this key question. Can I trust you to make a difference? By showing that you really grasp the problem, your visitors are more likely to trust you to be part of the solution. So let's see how a couple of nonprofits did this. And I want to give a just quick content warning before I advance the slide. The next slide is going to reference pregnancy and infant loss. And so I just take care while listening. Feel free to mute the presentation, or if you're watching this as a replay, feel free to mute the video. It's just going to be the next slide. It'll be safe to unmute once I advance beyond just this next slide. So this example here is coming from an organization we work with called Unspoken Motherhood. And they work with pregnant folks who have just experienced miscarriage or stillbirth or infant loss. And they're serving to bridge the gap between medical providers and the folks who are actually experiencing that loss. And they're still early in their journey as a nonprofit, so they don't have a ton of actual real life program data to report on yet, but they're still meeting a very specific need in their community. And they demonstrate that need and their understanding right on their impact. So they have stats here about the number of people estimated to experience these various situations. And they're also sharing stories here from their team further down the page. So they're really showcasing that they understand the problem at hand and also how their community is feeling when they're going through these really difficult situations, which just helps build a lot of trust in their ability ultimately to be able to provide a solution. I'm going to pause briefly for anyone that might be unmuting to rejoin. So here's another example from one of our clients, MSL3 Syndrome Foundation. Um, they're just doing a ton of stats. This is an ultra rare disease, MSL3 syndrome. And so there just aren't many statistics and facts about it. There's just not a whole lot of folks who have been diagnosed with such an ultra rare disease. Um, but they know that navigating a rare disease can be a really lonely process for the whole family. And so what they do here is they highlight that on their impact page. They're sharing stories of children and their families navigating diagnosis and finding community with one another. And they're also highlighting sort of that dual sense of relief and heartbreak at getting a diagnosis. But at least these families know that they definitely aren't alone on the journey anymore. And so what they're really doing is using these stories on their impact page to make it explicitly clear just why their work is so essential and that they can be trusted to continue making a difference in the lives of kiddos and their families. And speaking of stories, the next big bucket that we're going to talk about here is using stories to both personalize and elevate your impact. So when someone visits your impact page, they don't just want to know how many people you served, right? They want to understand who was helped and what changed in their life and why it mattered and, you know, what that allowed them to go on to do, et cetera. And so stories really offer that connection, right? They bring your work to life through the words and experiences of real people, and they illustrate the difference that you're making in the world. The way I think about it is stats make it clear that those stories are not isolated occurrences, but the stories are what actually spark that connection with your visitor. So how do we use that? First, feature a story or two that illustrates change. Think of these as brief but meaningful snapshots of your impact. It's generally more than a quote, but less than a full case study, is how I kind of think of what we're talking about here. And these stories should really reinforce and add depth to the outcomes that you've outlined on this page. They could be written stories, a few sentences, or they could even be a brief video. But really, the whole point is that they're helping to illustrate the work that you're doing and the outcomes that you're sharing on your impact page. So I think examples help with all of these. I'm a visual learner in general, but I think they help specifically illustrate this point. So here's another example actually from Faith Community Pharmacy, who I mentioned earlier. They're the folks who are providing free medications for folks who can't afford them. And we saw that snapshot of some stats and outcomes that they were sharing. And then lower on their impact page, we have this client spotlight. And it's briefly telling Greg's story, who left the hospital with a prescription he couldn't afford after suffering a cardiac arrest. And because of their work and, of course, the generosity of their supporters, Greg got his new prescription for free. And he also got other medications that he'd been skipping or rationing, like insulin. And then they even include his photo here alongside his story just to kind of bring it all home. So I think this just really nicely illustrates a way to use a brief story to really connect with your visitors. And here's another example. This time it's being shared through a video. So this is coming from St. John's program for Real Change, which supports women in crisis and their kiddos through an amazing residential program. And in this video, Erica is telling her story and shares her experience with achieving sobriety and earning her degree and reuniting with her children and rebuilding her confidence. And she just like exemplifies the results that are possible with their program. Um, but one quick note about stories is it's really important to consider ethical storytelling here. Um, just like how do you honor the people that you serve who are trusting you with their stories? It is a big topic. It's a really important topic. So much so that we are actually going to be covering that at our next office hours. We felt like it connected well to what we're talking about here today. And we're going to bring in an expert to talk about this. Some of you may know her, Carly Euler, over at Memory Fox. You may know Memory Fox, even if you don't know Carly. They're doing amazing work with ethical storytelling. So we're going to drop a link to register for that in the chat. If you would like to join us, we would love to have you. But again, we're going to dive deep into ethical storytelling. We just wanted to mention here that it's really important to be mindful of the way that you're not only collecting those stories, but displaying them in a way that honors the people that are trusting you by sharing their stories. Next up, you should also use brief quotes or testimonials to elevate your outcomes. So these are generally shorter than those longer stories, but they still do a lot to instill confidence in your visitors that you're capable of delivering on your mission. And the key is that these quotes and testimonials should be unique to you and your work, right? They should be more specific and illustrative. Like we want to avoid overly generic or vague quotes. It shouldn't sound like the kind of quote that you or that could be referring to any organization. Something like "they're great" belongs on a box of Frosted Flakes, not your nonprofit's impact page. So here's a look at the impact page for one of our clients, Operational Canine Medical Team of Wisconsin. And Op Canine provides training to folks responsible for working with and caring for working dogs, like, EMS, first responders, search and rescue, police, folks like that. And they've got this quote from a canine handler, which says, "Without the team at Op Canine and the classes they teach, I'm certain that our canine wouldn't be working in the field today and doing what he loves." And then below that are a couple of photos and brief stories like we just talked about. And they showcase the dogs who are alive today, and some of them are still working because of the training. So these stories are just so much more powerful than statistics alone, which might tell you sort of how many trainings were delivered, but don't give you a deep glimpse into the outcomes that, the training is producing, and these stories and quotes, I think, really help give you that deeper sense and build that connection with your visitors where statistics alone just wouldn't. And here's another example from Proteus. They support agricultural workers and their families with things like affordable healthcare and educational assistance and job training. And here are a few snippets from their impact page. It's actually showing a few different parts of their page, because then they just do a phenomenal job throughout their impact page, really centering their clients and letting these folks speak to the impact of their programs. They've really just gone above and beyond. They're sharing data actually broken up by program area, which is super cool. And then these testimonials and stories really serve to elevate that work. So it helps visitors clearly see and feel like why their work is so essential and the difference that it's making in real people's lives. Next up, consider sharing links to more detailed stories and content as needed. So your impact page doesn't need to be filled to the brim with every story and stat that you have available. A great way to avoid overstuffing your page is by linking out to other places for more information. And then that way visitors are still kind of, if they're still looking for more information, they're still looking for more detailed kind of ways to engage with your impact. They can follow those links and find what they're interested in, but we're not overwhelming visitors directly on the impact. So here's an example of that. It's coming from Aging Ahead. And they are highlighting a couple of ways that you can avoid overwhelming visitors. So one is by placing stories in these accordions. So they're actually expandable. People can click on them if they want to read more about that story. And then the other is they are linking visitors to a category on their blog called Heart of the Matter, which is where they're sharing even more stories like this. So they're not even putting all their stories here on their impact page. They're kind of teasing a few and then linking people to where they can read more stories that they're interested in doing so. Next up, be sure to focus your page and cut the clutter. So when you're working on a page like an impact page, it's tempting to really try and pack in every stat and story and quote and reports and snippet of data that you have. Especially when you're trying to prove the value of your work and the results that you've seen. But when you overload your impact page, you actually make it harder for visitors to understand and remember what's actually important. Because everything you add steals attention from everything that's already there. And that's true on your impact page. That's true really everywhere on your website. That's something, if you've been to office hours in the past, you've heard us talk about in other contexts. But it's an especially easy trap to fall into when you're mostly just kind of adding reports or stories to your impact page. But what a lot of folks do is they'll sort of add piece by piece over a long stretch of time, and they won't sort of circle back and remove information. And so it can fill up really quickly and start to feel pretty disjointed or confusing. So just, your impact page, it's not a place to report out on everything you've ever done. It's more just about helping folks understand the difference you're making. Again, answering the key question, can I trust you to make a difference? So instead of treating it like an archive of all of your work, think of it more like a highlight reel. Focus on the most compelling, current and meaningful examples of your work, and then let the other pages and posts on your site really kind of carry the rest of the heavy lifting. So what are some practical ways to do this? First, present your content directly on the page. Instead of trying sort of to tie it all up in an impact report or an infographic that's comprehensive that your visitors have to download and view, put that information on the page itself. Now, these reports and images can be great additions, but don't require your visitors to dig through a lengthy PDF to pull out key statistics. Like you want to at least put some of the highlights, some of the most kind of meaningful nuggets of insight directly from your reports onto your impact page directly. So here's an example from a client of ours, St. Louis Integrated Health Network. This is their impact page. They have this comprehensive impact report at the top of their impact page that folks can download. And it's an incredible report. They pull really meaningful data and put it together in a way that's really beautiful. But then they also pull out content from that report and use it on the page itself to sort of highlight key impact stats and results and testimonials. So visitors can download the full report if they want to dive deeper, but they don't have to, right? In order to get value from visiting the impact page. Next, use clear headings to make the page easier to skim and provide some sort of visual hierarchy. Like you just want visitors to basically be able to read and understand the story that you're telling on the page. And that's a lot harder to do when the page is unruly or hard to read. You really want your page to be easy to skim. And one trick here is try skimming through just the headings of your page without actually reading your content. And ask yourself, will visitors get a sense of what each section is about? Will they kind of know where on the page to jump to if they're looking for something specific? Just reading the headings can help you make sure that they're as strong as they can be. And finally, it's a good idea to consider whether certain impact information might be a better fit on other relevant pages of your site. Again, not every stat or quote necessarily needs to land on your main impact page. Um, so really what we talked about before applies here. Like if we're trying to put everything on this page, it's going to clutter things up and it's going to make it harder for visitors to answer that question. And I trust you to make a difference. And so instead, look at other pages of your website that might be bolstered by some of the data or stories that you're either sharing on your impact page or maybe that are sort of being left on the cutting room floor of your impact page. Things like program pages, service pages can be a great place to look. Event, volunteer pages, even giving pages can all be a good fit for a quote or a key statistic. So not only does that help you strengthen those other pages, but it'll help you also keep your impact page a little bit more focused and a little bit easier to read. Next up, you'll want to provide a clear next step for folks to stay engaged. Once a visitor understands the difference you're making, don't leave them hanging, right? If your impact page answers that question, can I trust you to make a difference? The natural follow-up in a visitor's mind is, what can I do to help? Right? How can I be part of that difference? And then whether you want people to donate or learn more or sign up for updates or get involved in some other way, the goal is really the same. We want to make it easy for them to take action while they're most engaged and motivated to take action. So how do we actually do that? First, as always, identify your audience for the page. If you've been to office hours, you've heard us talk about this a lot. Identifying your primary audience is so important. And the impact page just isn't, it's not for you, right? It's not for your team to admire all the great work that you've done. It's for your website visitors. So who is your audience, especially of the impact page? Identify that primary audience and prioritize them. This is, I know, one of the hardest things to do, but try really hard to limit yourself to one or two primary audience max. You can have secondary audiences, but if you try to speak to everyone, you're going to end up in this position of resonating with no one. And ultimately, that's not what we're looking to do with any page on our website, but especially a page as important as the impact page. So consider who your audience is, what next steps they might want to take after learning about your impact and learning that they can trust you to deliver on it. Because with that in mind, you're going to want to offer a clear and compelling call to action for this audience specifically. And I like to recommend one action whenever possible for clarity, because something else you've probably heard us say at some time in the past, a confused mind never converts. That's something we say a lot. A confused mind never converts. Just clarity is really what's going to ultimately lead to that spark of connection with your visitors and get them to want to take meaningful action on your website. So getting really clear on your primary audience will help you pick the next step that they're most likely to be interested in taking. And then make it as compelling as possible. Like use their language, right? Not your own internal jargon. Keep it really brief whenever you possibly can. Make it visual whenever possible. It could be as simple as a button. It could be a more visual call to action. We'll look at an example here in a second. And then another piece here is make sure that it's logically connected to the content of your impact page. So it feels like sort of this natural continuation of the visitor's journey on your website. All of this will sort of roll up to help you better engage your visitors. So here's a quick example. This is from the Mercer Island Schools Foundation. They do a great job of combining both a clear audience and a clear call to action here um, on their impact page. They're speaking primarily to families in the community and inviting them to make a gift to support local students. So what they've actually done here is they feature a few videos of families explaining why they give. And then earlier on the page, they highlight students and their achievements. Then they move on to these videos to help just kind of make the case to parents and families that their investment is worthwhile. And then they've got this single, clear, visually distinct call to action to support our work by making a donation. And then they tie that donation to all of the impact visitors I have just finished learning about on the impact page. So it's a nice sort of, they're doing a lot here. We're just showing a piece of the page, but this does a nice job of illustrating what a clear, compelling call to action can look like in action. And last tip here, keep your page current. Right? Your impact page is really all about building trust with your visitors, but if stories and data that you're sharing is years out of date, that can erode trust pretty quickly. Uh, yeah, honestly, an outdated impact page can sometimes be more harmful than it is helpful, right? If your most recent stats are from 2020 or the quotes are referencing programs or services that you don't even offer any longer, like those things can definitely undercut the credibility that you've built and make your organization just kind of feel more stale, less active, even if, your work is stronger than ever. So one way to do this is by tying your page updates to existing reporting milestones within your organization. Like you just don't have to add a ton more work to your plate here or kind of overcomplicate this process. Maybe you're collecting stats and data in the spring and the fall on your programs. Maybe you're up, then just put in some sort of reminder or work it into your workflow to update your impact page in April and October. Just kind of work it into the processes that already exist, whether that's calendar invite or maybe you work through a checklist, adding it to your checklist of items. Um, can just be a nice way to, again, infuse it into processes and make it feel like it's not going to be a burden to update. And then another thing here, you can consider adding a last updated note to your impact page to note the last time the data was refreshed. So this can be especially helpful if you are using reporting milestones that are a little maybe slower going by nature. Like maybe you have some things that just don't change that often. You don't have a new report or anything like that happening, quarterly or anything like that. Or maybe you have some dates that you're sharing that are a little bit older, something like since 2018, we've helped X number of families, but you want visitors to know that you're keeping that number updated. A simple kind of last updated note can help. So here's an example. This one's coming from Canopy, Northwest Arkansas. And you can see, so Canopy, Northwest Arkansas, they work to create a community where refugees are welcomed and equipped with really all that they need to build new lives. And a lot of their work is slower by nature, right? It takes a lot of time and effort for folks to make their way to the United States and to resettle in their communities. And some of their dates are a little older, right? Like the first stat here is saying the number of individuals they've helped resettle since 2016, but we don't want someone to see 2016 and think like, oh, this page is outdated. So what they've done is you'll see they date the page here and they note that all of their numbers are current as of April 2025, which just helps reassure visitors that the page is being kept up to date. Quick note of caution here. Some of you all might be thinking this. This can easily have the exact opposite effect if you let the page get outdated, right? Like if this said last updated April 2020, it would feel very different to visitors, right? So make sure that you have the process in place to either keep this page updated or at a bare minimum, go in and remove this note if the page starts to get outdated. So, if they don't have any new stats to share by maybe end of 2025, they could come in here and just remove updated April 2025 so that they don't have an old note sitting here working against. But ultimately, the best way that you can keep your impact page up to date is by auditing it once a year. And this includes adding new relevant information, but also removing older, less relevant information. And this is a critical piece that a lot of nonprofits miss. It's very common to fall into the habit of just adding a new report or a new stat or a new story as they come in. But if you're only adding and you aren't circling back to remove old content, again, it's very likely your page will become unruly over time. And a long, unruly impact page with, old data and outdated stories isn't very compelling for visitors. So carve out time, once a year to audit the page. Just recommend reading it top to bottom and make sure that it's still telling the story that you. So that's really it. These are the 5 steps that you can take to level up your impact page. Show why your work matters. Use stories to personalize and really elevate your impact. Focus your page and cut the clutter. Provide a clear next step for visitors to stay engaged, and keep your page current. Together, these steps should help you answer that key question on the minds of your visitors. Can I trust you to make a difference? And when the answer is yes, you'll ultimately just turn a lot more visitors into active supporters of your cause.